It started like any other episode of The View, but within minutes, everything went downhill. Sunny Hostin looked straight at Whoopi Goldberg and said something no one saw coming. The audience gasped, producers panicked, and Whoopi's face said it all. Was this the end of their friendship, or the beginning of something even darker? Stay till the end, because what Sunny exposed live on air left everyone in complete shock. It was supposed to be another ordinary morning on The View. The audience was cheerful, cameras were rolling, and the hosts were laughing, debating, and sharing opinions like always. But that day, something was off. There was a strange kind of tension in the air, invisible, but heavy. Even the audience seemed quieter than usual. As the discussion turned to Hollywood hypocrisy, Sunny Hostin's tone suddenly shifted. Her usual calm, composed voice grew sharper. She looked straight at Whoopi Goldberg and said, "It's funny how people preach one thing, but live another behind closed doors." For a few seconds, time froze. The studio went silent. You could almost hear the faint hum of the cameras capturing every second of what was about to unfold. Whoopi leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "You talking about me, Sunny?" Sunny didn't even flinch. She smiled faintly and said, "If the shoe fits." The audience gasped. And that's when chaos began to build, the kind of chaos no one could stop. Cliffhanger. Whoopi's expression changed, from confusion to anger. What came next would leave everyone in shock. It was supposed to be another ordinary morning on The View. The audience was cheerful, the cameras were rolling, and the hosts were doing what they always do, laughing, debating, and bouncing opinions like tennis balls. But that day, something felt off. The air was heavier. The smiles looked a little too forced. And behind the cheerful chatter, there was a tension so thick you could almost hear it hum beneath the laughter. As the discussion drifted toward Hollywood hypocrisy, Sunny Hostin leaned forward, her eyes sharp but calm. Her voice dropped a tone lower, deliberate, steady. "It's funny," she said, her words slicing through the noise, "how people love to talk about honesty and integrity, until it's time to actually practice it." The studio grew quiet. The crowd sensed it, something was happening. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting at the center, froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. She brushed it off like she always does, with humor, with grace, but her hands were trembling under the table. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She glanced toward the audience, they were confused, watching closely now. Then she turned her head slightly toward the producers behind the cameras, her expression almost pleading. A silent question hung in the air, should I keep going? But no one moved. The red light on the camera stayed on. The show was live. There was no cutting away from this. Whoopi straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and turned back to Sunny. Her voice was low, measured, but her eyes burned. "You want to talk about hypocrisy?" she said slowly. "Let's talk about how people pretend to be saints on camera while throwing shade off screen." The crowd didn't know what to do. A few gasped. Others exchanged glances, whispering. Some let out nervous laughter that died just as quickly as it began. Even Joy Behar tried to step in, forcing a laugh, saying something about keeping it light, but no one was listening. The tension had taken over the room. Sunny sat back, folded her arms, and smiled, that calm, knowing smile that hides more than it shows. When she spoke, her tone was quiet but sharp as a blade. "At least," she said, "I don't hide behind jokes when the truth hits too hard." The words landed like a slap. Whoopi's face froze, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. For a few seconds, the studio was dead silent. You could hear the faint buzz of the lights overhead. The cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of emotion, the shock in Whoopi's eyes, the discomfort in the other hosts, the panic flashing across the producers' faces offstage. Joy Behar shifted in her seat. Sarah Haynes looked down, fidgeting with her cue cards. The audience, hundreds of eyes staring, waiting, could feel something real unraveling live on air. Whoopi finally spoke, but not right away. She took her time, a long, uneasy silence stretching between them. Then she looked directly at Sunny, her expression changing from disbelief to something darker, colder. The tension in the studio was electric now, the kind that made even the air feel heavy. Every camera was locked in. Every audience member leaned forward in their seat. Whoopi sat frozen, hands folded on the table, eyes fixed on Sunny. The warmth that usually filled the set had drained out completely. What replaced it was cold, raw, and real. Sunny didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly, her tone calm but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Why not, Whoopi?" she asked softly, with a faint, defiant smile. "You always say, speak your truth, right?" "I'm just doing that." For a split second, no one breathed. Then the sound of gasps filled the studio, a ripple of disbelief that spread across the audience like shockwaves. Some people turned to each other, whispering, trying to figure out if this was all part of the show. But the hosts' faces told the truth, this was no script. Whoopi blinked slowly, her jaw tightening. She shook her head, her voice dropping lower, warning, measured. "You don't know what you're talking about, Sunny. Be careful." Sunny's expression didn't waver. Her voice turned cold, almost emotionless. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about." The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of studio lights and the rustle of someone shifting in the front row. The cameras zoomed in, catching every detail, the flicker of tension in Sunny's eyes, the quiet fury behind Whoopi's stare, the nervous glances between Joy Behar and Sarah Haynes. Joy finally tried to step in, her voice strained with forced cheer. "All right, ladies, maybe we should just move on, huh?" she said with an awkward laugh that landed flat. But neither woman moved. Sunny's eyes stayed locked on Whoopi. And Whoopi didn't blink. It was a battle of silence, two women, two legends, facing off under the unforgiving glare of live television. Finally, Whoopi exhaled, her shoulders dropping slightly. She looked tired, not angry, not even defensive, just weary. Her voice came out quiet, almost resigned. "You know what," she said slowly, "I've been in this industry long enough to recognize when someone's trying to make a moment." That line, simple as it was, felt like a punch in the gut. Sunny's smirk faltered. For the first time, her confidence wavered, but only for a heartbeat. Then she leaned back in her chair, eyes still locked on Whoopi, and said firmly, "No, Whoopi. I'm not making a moment." She paused, the tension thick enough to choke on. "I'm making a point." A stunned silence followed, no laughter, no chatter, not even a cue from the producers. The red light above the camera stayed on. They were live. Millions were watching. And that's when things truly started to spiral, because Sunny's point wasn't just words. It was personal. The air in the studio had grown unbearably still. Even the laughter from the audience had vanished, replaced by an electric silence that buzzed beneath the lights. Sunny sat motionless for a moment, her expression calm, too calm, before she finally spoke. Her tone was soft, almost gentle, but the weight behind her words hit like a hammer. "You talk about honesty, Whoopi," she began, her voice carrying through the studio like a whisper that everyone heard, "but what about the people you hurt behind the scenes? The ones who can't speak because they're scared?" The reaction was instant, gasps rippled across the room. A few audience members covered their mouths. Others turned toward each other, whispering frantically. The crew, normally invisible behind the cameras, froze. Even the floor manager's hand, mid-signal, hung in the air. This wasn't banter anymore. This was an accusation, live, unfiltered, and devastating. Whoopi's face changed in an instant. The warmth was gone. Her famous easy smile, gone. All that was left was a tense stillness in her jaw, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. She leaned slightly forward, her voice low and warning. "That's enough." But Sunny didn't stop. Her words came sharper now, deliberate, unflinching. "No, it's not enough. You preach respect, but you don't practice it." The crowd murmured louder this time, some gasped, some booed, and others sat frozen, wide-eyed, watching history unfold in real time. Behind the cameras, chaos erupted. Producers waved frantically, trying to get someone's attention. The director's voice came through the earpieces, cut to commercial, now. But the delay felt like forever. On the monitors, the red live icon was still blinking. Every second was still being broadcast to millions of homes across the country. Then, before the feed could switch, Whoopi stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor echoed through the silent studio. The entire audience went dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. She didn't say anything right away. She just stood there, facing Sunny, her eyes steady, cold, hurt, but powerful. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You don't embarrass people you respect," she said softly. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. And then, she turned and walked off the set. Her footsteps echoed all the way to the stage exit. Joy Behar sat frozen, her mouth half open. Sarah Haynes stared straight ahead, pale and speechless. The studio lights flickered slightly as the director finally cut the feed. On screen, viewers saw only a flash of Sunny, still seated at the table, composed, her expression unreadable. Calm. Almost victorious. And then, the screen faded to black. But what the cameras didn't show, what happened off camera, after those lights went down, would be far more explosive than anything that had aired live. Because that confrontation was only the beginning. That night, social media was on fire. Hashtag Whoopi vs. Sunny, hashtag The View Meltdown, millions of views in hours. Clips were replayed, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Some said Sunny crossed a line. Others said she finally exposed the truth everyone ignored. But hours later, a leaked video began circulating, grainy, shaky, recorded from a backstage phone. It showed Whoopi walking quickly toward the exit, visibly upset. A crew member asked quietly, "You okay, Whoopi?" She stopped, looked at him, and said, "You don't embarrass people you respect. Remember that." And then she left the building.